All right. According to all of the instrumentation, we are live. We are there on YouTube, Twitter, and Rumble. I am going to be catching up with any comments that people have as best as I can. And today, thank you so much for joining me because I have a very special guest. Known to the people at Blackbird's Brew as Haunted Pagan, I have the host of the American Folklore and Paranormal podcast. Welcome, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Appreciate being on here.
Oh, always glad to have a new face. And hello to Amanda. She is joining us in the chat. Thank you so much, ma'am. I hope you enjoy what we've got in store for everybody today. Before we get started on the topic, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about your podcast and, most importantly, where they can find you?
Okay, sounds good. I am the host of the American Folklore and Paranormal podcast. It is all stories in folklore, paranormal, folk heroes within the United States and in North America, because some of them cross with Canada and Mexico, but everything dealing specifically with us here in the United States. Urban legends, you name it. I mean, everything from Paul Bunyan to Bigfoot to Native American tales, and definitely should check it out. It's a progressively improving podcast, I think, and you can catch me on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, Spotify, and anywhere else you can listen to podcasts.
Fabulous. Thank you. Definitely check him out, people. And I've got the links, I think, to his YouTube channel in the description box. It's either your YouTube or your Rumble. So either way, they can definitely get a hold of you. So
Right.
now that we've got that sorted out, the one of the reasons why we started to do a little bit of talking about collaborating and talking about some more topics is because as always we got some rather nasty press, and we've got people who don't understand what paganism is, what we believe, and why we're actually very much in alignment with American values. And they were just kind of talking some smack. I lost my temper. I think you and the other gentlemen in the group had a much more moderate reaction. But it's important for us to speak up for ourselves, isn't it? And to make sure that the bad stuff or the misrepresentation by people who don't really know what they're doing or why, that isn't the only thing that people see from pagans. So you suggested that we start with a question of what is a pagan. So what's your best answer for that at this moment?
That is an excellent question because, I mean, it's described in two ways. One is via the outside, say Christianity, Judaism, look as pretty much anybody not within their religion as a pagan. Most people, I think, who do identify as pagan usually fall under, I would say, generally like neo paganism, Wicca, um, Reconstructionist paganism, stuff like that. Although I do know plenty people who practice occultism, say Styx Hexenhammer. He's an occultist, considers himself a pagan, even though he doesn't believe in any specific deities or anything like that. So, I mean, in many ways, it kind of is. Anybody outside the mainstream religions tend to call themselves pagan, but I have run into more and more people who are kind of trying to even move themselves outside of that to be their own distinguished religious formation. I've
I
ran
mean,
into
it
a few
is.
druids and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, it really is difficult to really describe what falls under that umbrella because it is pretty broad, and because we're all fighting about definitions these days endlessly, it can get to be kind of a tricky wicket. One of the definitions that I heard a few years ago that I really, really liked is that they defined the difference between a pagan and a non pagan, depending on whether or not they had a world accepting a worldview or if they had a world denying worldview. Essentially, the difference is the goal of your spirituality to get off of this physical plane and not return so far as you are able to? Or do you have a worldview in which the spiritual and the material are intertwined, forever flowing one onto the other, inextricably linked, and something that just exists. You will find the divine manifested in the physical. You will find echoes of the physical in the divine. And I've really come to like that definition because it makes it clear that it isn't just about, our labels, about whether we're using the umbrella term of pagan or we're referring to some form of witchcraft, or whether it's druidry or asatru or something else. It's talking about a state of mind. What do you think about that distinction?
I think that's a pretty good distinction. I would definitely agree with that. I don't have any arguments on that or an add-on to it. Really, that spells it out pretty good.
Well, if you did, I could direct you to the person who I heard it from. So there's always that possibility. But I think it is important to make a distinction because I don't like the idea of someone outside of the pagan sphere defining who we are or what we do. I don't like the whole thing of, well, if you're not part of the Abrahamic traditions, you're therefore a pagan. Well, I understand that's the opinion that many of them have, but I don't think that we are defined by what others happen to think of us. And I do think that one of the things we are struggling with in the present day is having the confidence to really say, if I'm not really concerned with what someone else is saying, I know where I stand. I know what my ground is, and I am going to define myself. Do you find that to be a fairly common thread amongst pagans of your acquaintance who aren't necessarily in my circle? Or have you seen some other issues kind of crop up for people?
So I balance my world between Christianity and paganism, being a pagan myself, my wife being a Christian. Actually, I have one brother that is a pastor, a sister that's a devout Roman Catholic, and another brother that is actually very devout fundamentalist. So it's kind of an interesting orbit that I have and what I deal with. And so I think, how do I do it? So when talking to Christians, they look at paganism as satanic. You're the devil. All your gods are false gods. They're demons in disguise. And it's really hard to break down the philosophical and historical viewpoints, especially since paganism is so widespread. Someone who, let's say, has more of a Norse or Germanic pantheon or following compared to, say, even that of the Greek or the Romans, or even someone who maybe is Hindu or something like that. How we approach, how we look at the gods and how we look at the spiritual life plays in differently. And it's very hard to explain to a Christian who, for the last, well, let's be honest, 2,000 years, have been able to dominate the spiritual scene and define what is and what is not pagan, what is evil and what is not. And of course, you get some weirdos out there that have, in my opinion, strange and odd views, but more power to them. But it is, those are the people that get the attention, and it's hard to break people's mindsets of what's been given to them. Everyone thinks that pagans are human sacrificing, devil worshiping, half goat, half man kind of people. I don't know.
And then once they discover that, no, they're actually pretty normal and they live kind of boring lives for the most part, and they just happen to pray to different people, they're like, oh, what a letdown. You mean Hollywood and the propaganda told me wrong? Sometimes I think some people are almost disappointed when we don't live up to our reputation. And before we go on, I want to say hello to Wiccan Conservative, a.k.a. Georgia Liberty. So glad to have you here, ma'am.
Hey, Georgia.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important for us to talk and really talk about not really so much about how the outside world sees us, because I think you did a beautiful job. And certainly from a lot of conservative Christians, that's pretty much what we're getting. Everything that they see is threatening to not just their worldview and not just their spiritual paradigm, but their very way of life, the very essence of Americanism. They think that, oh, well, if it's pagan, therefore it's here to tear it down. And it would be, if we could just break that prejudice down and they could see that, no, we're in a lot of ways, we want the same things. I think that could go a long way to them starting to see us, oh, we're just a segment of their society that, maybe they're not always comfortable with us, but, back at you, kid. We're not always comfortable with you, but one way or the other, we'll figure a way to roll along. So, in that effort, let's talk about some pagan values. What is the first one that really comes to your mind that is important to you?
Sure, sure. Actually, if I can add one thing that you're
Oh, by
talking
all
about the
means,
situation
by all
culturally
means.
too, what I find is very ironic historically is that the Christians, are now in the same position as the Roman pagans were
Yeah.
2,000 years ago. And basically, it's everything circling around.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of the Christians being the people that eat babies and do weird stuff in the dark, now it's the pagans. And oddly enough, a lot of Christian leaders use the same arguments that the Roman leaders would use for their reason to persecute Christians and stuff like that. I find that funny that it's come full circle. Hopefully, we don't get the same persecution as they did back then.
Hopefully not. What I'm really worried about that's following in that same cycle are, the woke, what I would call the church of
Yes,
woke. And that's the one of the cases I would really like to make to the Christians. I'm saying we've got a common opponent here. We
right.
can figure out how to live amongst ourselves, but those people, they're not going to live with anybody. But moving right along, let's talk about some pagan values. What does first come to your mind?
Honestly, and this was one of the biggest things that really attracted me to paganism, is the value of family.
Hmm.
Family and ancestors are a big deal to me. And that is something actually I battled with, even as a Christian with my own family and stuff, how important it is to know who's in your past, good or for
Hmm.
bad, and
Hmm.
where you come from really does play a part in who you are now, and allows you to take that and focus what you want to move onto the future. Like what I provide for my children, what legacy I leave for them,
Hmm.
and hopefully it's positive. But I think that's a big deal with that you find in paganism that other faiths that I've dealt with kind of lack a little bit, and something that's been lost. Actually, I think within America itself is that people talk about family, but when you really see it, it's not. It's very selfish in many ways, especially with
And
the rise of woke.
yeah. And what makes that worse is that people, at one hand, they have this illusion of what they think is that they think they're honoring the concept of the family. And then they're very readily able to identify when things go wrong because there isn't a solid family structure, whether it's coming up in behavioral issues in children or criminality in adults or whatever the issue is. They can see, okay, we really need to do something with the family. And yet they really fall short of the doing. And I think that's something that paganism could really have to offer because for us, I mean, we're not just the hereticians. It's all about what do you actually put into practice? Because until you practice, well, what are you doing? And I think we could
Right.
actually put that to the Christians, and especially with family. And that's very difficult because, myself included, my family on my parents' side, well, mostly my mother's side, but both of my parents, they're Jehovah's Witnesses. And you leave that religion, you're out. So there's a lot of other people who, whether they're, ex-JWs, which I'm sure is a very small number, but also people who've been in other situations that were very extreme and having to rediscover, what is that concept of family? How can we cultivate it? And I think we have to really go to pagan lore and look at various families within that lore who went above and beyond, who actually did things for their family that they would never have dreamt of going to such lengths for anyone else. And it's at least it gives us something to emulate because overcoming a bad example, I mean, that's no small feat.
No, that is true. I would definitely say I knew quite a few JWs back in the day, and I know well, in a lot of ways, you were very isolated, weren't allowed to celebrate a lot of
Oh
the
yeah.
holidays, whether they were actual Christian holidays or civic holidays and stuff like that. I mean, I can see your point of view. I used to have a lot of fun with the JWs when they used to come through the door, because
Many
they would
people
ask if
did.
right, right. And my favorite was they would ask if I found Jesus yet, and it'd be like, crying, you lost him again. Let's go and go walk outside with him and go looking. Usually they were kind of baffled with it.
Oh, That's fun. When I was doing the door-to-door thing, I never had that experience. I mean, usually if people didn't want to talk, I picked up on that fairly quickly and I'm like, let's go. And what's worse is that whenever I was at the door with someone and they wanted to try to overcome this objection, I'm like, please, we've already treaded on good manners simply by knocking on their door unannounced. Do we have to make it worse?
Right.
But it's a valuable
Actually, I was
lesson.
a part of Southern Baptist growing up, and they used to like to go door to door too. So I
Really?
understand that experience. Oh yeah.
Well, I'll say this, if you do have the courage of your convictions to go knock on a door, that means a person's got a backbone. And,
Right.
my goodness, do we ever need a backbone in today's society now? And let's see. The next thing that I really wanted to mention as far as pagan values was is really the pursuit of excellence. Certainly, if you read through the Celtic triads, there's a lot of verses about the necessity to pursue excellence, do the best at what you can do at whatever it is that you are doing. And it isn't even, make sure you do better than, John the farmer down the road is doing. It's like do better than yourself. And I see similar things echoed in the Havamal. And certainly I see within the Stoic philosophers that idea of self cultivation. Um, is that something that you've also found in your own studies?
Yes, I have definitely found that, especially compared to my old background where you're a dirty, grimy sinner and there's nothing you can do for yourself. Where with paganism, it's you grab your bootstraps, pull them up, get to work, and move forward with it. And with everything that you do, you honor the gods, you honor the ancestors, and like I was saying too, with the family value, you leave
Mm-hmm.
that legacy behind. And I see that come to fruition with my own children as now they're of age to work, and they take that same work ethic in everything that they do, whether it's sports or their job or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that they're doing.
And that's such a valuable thing to pass on because and so many people forget to pass that on. They're so busy coddling their children and making sure they have this cozy artificial bubble of a childhood that they don't think about the long term, about how this period of childhood is really to help them become an adult and to blossom into this world and be able to take their proper places in it. So it is incredibly encouraging to hear that someone has put in the work and is seeing the good fruitage from that.
Yes,
See, and Amanda was saying how we all venerate ancestors, but some Christians won't admit it. Boy, isn't that true? Isn't that the
it is.
truth?
You
Let me
definitely
see.
get that in Catholicism and Orthodoxy. You get the veneration of the saints, and that's pretty much the same thing. They just put, you know, a holiness title on it, and that's the only difference.
That's for sure. And I was just checking our Rumble chat, and Paddy Parlour Games is in there with us. Hello, Paddy. He very kindly donated to my tea fund. So thank you
Awesome.
very much for that, sir. Always appreciated. I'm a much pleasanter person once I have my tea. Let's see. So what's another value that you find pretty consistently through your studies that you would just really describe as a pagan value?
Um, that is a good question. I would say the concept of honor and integrity,
Mm-hmm.
especially as being a veteran, that really coincided because integrity and honor, even though people kind of get it mixed up as the same thing, are two integral parts, symbiotic things that have to go together, and that is important with many pagan cultures, especially within Norse and Celtic and the Anglo-Saxon cultures, where integrity and honor are huge, and they say a lot about who your character really is. In fact, in most cases, I would say it's probably the foundation of all your virtues is integrity and honor.
I like that, especially the bit that you mentioned about integrity, because if you don't have hypocrisy within your soul, I mean, so far as what's humanly possible, but if you have that solid bedrock, then so many problems in life don't really come up because you're not thinking about things in the term of, well, how can I use backhanded, underhanded dealings to get ahead? Because you're focused on what you ought to be doing. So I do think it is very fair to call that the foundation of virtue. And hello to Marcus, Crazy Witch. Glad to have you here with us, sir.
Hey, Marcus.
So, on the idea of integrity and honor, because that is something that is sorely lacking in American society, and I think advocating for that is something that pagans can really be adding a net value to our overall society with. What difference do you think that would make if this became a widespread virtue, whether just from a baseline human level of, this is a good thing, or people becoming more pagan leaning and therefore I must be more honorable because those are the values that I have accepted into my soul? Do you think that we'd be seeing a little bit of a difference in how business is conducted in our society?
I would think so. Having personal honor was a big deal in pre-Christian society. Period. I know people have different thoughts about what honor is, like say like a
Hmm.
samurai or something like that, or
Hmm.
maybe a medieval knight. But really, honor is something that no person, no man can take away. That is something you destroy yourself in the way you act and your hospitality and how you treat people and how you lift your family up in that. And I think if people had more honor in knowing that, in a sense, they condemn their own soul when they're dishonorable, I think you would have a much different society and understanding how integrity works with that. And my definition of integrity is doing what's right, even when nobody's looking.
Hmm.
And and I think that plays a key part in honor because if you can't do right, even when nobody else is there to praise you or tell you you're doing a good job, then you really don't have true honor because the two are side by side with each other on that.
And I would also say that goes hand in hand with the concept of courage, because if you're going to buckle
Yes.
down every time you're pressured in some way, well, can it really be said that you have honor at all?
Right. Right. And having courage is a virtue, and courage is not meaning that you're not scared. It just means you just have that bravery in spite of being scared. That's,
And I think that's a lesson we could take forward after the whole COVID debacle. If people had been brave, if people had been level headed and not given into hysteria, if people had looked at the strictures and said, look, you don't have the right to tell us what to do, I think we would be in a much better situation right now.
yes. Yes. COVID definitely broke a lot of people.
Yeah. But I mean, that's another thing that I think we can go back to pagan virtues with, because it's very cyclical. We always see this in mythologies, and particularly when you come to different forms of witchcraft, everything is cyclical, time is cyclical, patterns of behaviors and seasons, it's all cyclical. So the process of being broken down, while, I mean, deeply unpleasant, I mean, no doubts about that. There's always this understanding of you have found the bottom rung, and now you can go on the upswing if you choose to do so. So I'm hoping that at least in the long term, that the people breaking down will at least open up their minds to entertaining ideas, or to engage with ideas they already had in a much more meaningful way.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
You cut out a little bit on that one.
oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'll move my microphone a little bit better and see if that doesn't help anything. Let me know if it's an ongoing problem. Um,
Okay.
But we have kind of a general sense of pagan values, because it is about, that sense of, whether or not I'm a good person, that really is up to me. I've got to answer to my own conscience, what my relationship with the gods are, however I envision them. I mean, that's between me and them. The need for honor, integrity, pursuing excellence, upholding your family. These are pretty common, solid things that I don't think a reasonable person would really find fault with when you get right down to it, once they get past religious disagreement. But also, I'd like to kind of move on to this idea of how they are connected with American values. Because if you take the common Republican political commercial talking about what they consider to be American values, has there been anything that we've discussed that really contradicts at least the image that they're trying to project?
Um, I wouldn't say, well, what they're trying to advertise, their actions, I would say, definitely contradict
Oh yeah, we're
American
not talking
values.
about their
But
actions right now. I'd have to get pills for the migraine that would ensue from that.
right, no, I would say in general, conservatism does line up very much with pagan values on a whole. Um, I mean, I know there are pagans on the left that would disagree with that.
Mhm.
but I think some of that is a corrupted view of what they call justice,
Oh
and what is equality. Because even in paganism, equality is not mean being the same. They understood the
yeah.
differences between people and between themselves and the gods, and themselves and between the natural world, and knew the limitations of themselves as well as well. Now I lost my train of thought on that, so I'll leave it at that right there.
Well, no, let's follow up on this. You talked about they understood their limitations, which is why you saw kind of a more natural equilibrium between the people and their environment, between the people and the gods, and honestly, even within the family unit and structure. There wasn't this expectation that I have to be exactly like you in order to have value or respect or anything of that kind. Um, So this idea of limitations, and a lot of our pagan brethren on the left, they tend to eschew the idea of limitations, or that there should be any, and that's something that's also running rampant through our society. Could you make a case for why limitations are actually beneficial?
Yeah, if you're limited, that prevents you realistically going too far. I
Hmm.
mean, you see what's going on with the trans movement. I mean, there's a
Hmm.
limit on to what your emotions can do, what your
Yeah.
feelings are, and to reality of what you are biologically. I mean, you can physically change yourself, but you can't change your DNA unless you become a god yourself. And even if they were able to find a way to manipulate DNA, I think there would be extreme corruption that would come with that, and that would also show the limitations, or the necessity of limitations.
Well, and in that vein, I mean, there's so much information coming to light about some of the consequences of how much chemicals we're inundated with through a variety of forms. I won't be too much more specific because we are still streaming to YouTube and they're sensitive. But it does
Right.
seem like there's a limit to how much junk is put into the human body, or even how much good stuff, if it's coming in a way that we weren't really meant to absorb it. I mean, so many things, it seems like we should be, taking this in through our food, or we should be getting the vitamin D because we're actually outside and not trapped inside all the time. I think we are also reaching the limitation of the benefits of what modernity can actually bring, and going to need to have a bit of an awakening about what
Yes.
how much actually is too much. And American culture, it struggles with excess.
Yeah, that is very, very true. And I think that's why we have a lot of the problems that we do, is because for so long we were able to push the limits more and more and more. I think we're coming to a head to where that's all going to kind of collapse in on ourselves. I think a lot of people are going to get hurt when they realize that things are not unlimited without becoming a slave
Yeah.
and living in that deception.
Yeah, and living in deceptions has been a major problem for people, for sure. And Paddy's Parlour Games, he made a comment that references what we were talking about courage a moment ago. He was talking about the courage to stand and live. It takes courage just to walk outside the door some days, but courage grows like a muscle. I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, all things get better with familiarity, and I think people have the capacity to be much braver than they really think that they are. I think they just expect too much of themselves too soon. Do a brave thing quietly when no one's looking, and then gradually do it in front of your next door neighbor, and then you can take on the world.
Right. It really is the small things that really build up to the big things. Those are the small things are what build up your reputation and really build up how people view you. Like just small things, like just living in a polite society alone, opening up the door, somebody drops something, you pick it up and you return it to them. Little things like that make a big deal. And especially when it comes to courage, and
Mhm.
simply is telling your kid, no, you can't do that. You're going to hurt
Mhm.
yourself. Or just telling like a friend, like, nope, sorry, don't disagree with you on that. You know,
Or more adventurously disagreeing with your spouse, which can be a very scary
right?
thing. Because it's your spouse. You've pledged, to spend a lifetime with them. They're precious to you. Everything is emotionally charged, even if you're having a relatively calm discussion. So being able to say, "Dear, I don't think that was the height of brilliance." That is a
Right.
very brave thing. um,
Right. And my wife has said that many times to me. So,
Well, I think it's easier for us to say that to you because when you say it to us, we have all this bad training to use that as the opening gambit of psychological warfare, which
That's why
I'm
I let her admit it first, and then I disagree. Kind of.
tactics. I love it. And Amanda's saying there must be a distinction between our eternal lives and our temporal state. We can get along with this understanding. I am happy for Christians and non pagans to have whatever conceptions that they have, provided they're not interfering with us. I don't need to have an agreement with you about. The divisions between the corporeal life and the non corporeal life and what that means and everything else in order just to coexist with you. And yeah, I think I'll probably leave it at that because I'm just not interested in Christian theology from their standpoint. It's not my circus, not my monkeys kind of thing.
Well, I would also say that the consequences that you have in this life here and now are good motivators to do right and wrong.
Yeah,
It doesn't
that is for
necessarily
sure.
have to be eternal flame or eternal paradise. Although, I mean, some pagans do. I mean, that's kind of where the concept of hell comes from. It comes from the Greeks. The Buddhists have,
Mhm.
I think, over 100 hells. And some pagans have their own version of afterlife. And in the end, I guess we'll find out once we're dead who's right and who's
Yeah.
wrong.
Well, and and I've also been, tossed out the possibility if what if your afterlife is absolutely determined by which gods you answered to?
That is a possibility.
I mean, we don't know. No one has actually given us the rule book, and if they did, how could we possibly, um, how could we confirm it? That's the word I was looking for. How could we, in this absolute logistical, we have enough proof to take this to court to be absolutely sure? No, I mean, at a certain point, things just do become a matter of faith for sure.
Right.
So probably the most famous expression of American values is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
Could you maybe we could talk a little bit about how that is pretty much the core premise of paganism as well?
Yeah. I think I would say, at least starting with life, just the fact that you have that right to live and
Hmm.
to pursue that life how you want to live. I guess also in the context that there's also limits on that, that your liberties um, don't, I guess, really crush on other people's liberties. I know we were talking about
Hmm.
limitations earlier and stuff like that.
Hmm.
How trying to think of the best way to put it. It's just the fact that you have been given this life on this planet and here in America with the pagan values that allows you to express that life in the best way possible. Also, that it contributes to your family and how they live their life. I guess in that sense. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I'm putting it how I can think it in my head, but it's not coming out my mouth right.
Oh, I think you're doing just fine. Besides, this is what these streams are for, so we can talk out loud. And
Right.
while you were saying that, I was also kind of thinking about how we do have a wonderful opportunity here to actually have to live our lives in the best way possible with the most freedom that is possible, proper freedom. Because as you say, we shouldn't be advocating for a world in which I have the liberty, to punch you on the nose if I happen to be having a bad day. No, you get to walk down the street with a perfectly intact, non-injured nose, regardless of what mood anyone else is in. And it's important to have that mutual respect in society. But one thing that I think is very core is that one of the things I've picked up from pagan lore is that while there is certainly suffering in life and those challenges are inevitable and sometimes they are the making of you, that doesn't follow that the purpose of life is suffering. I mean, the Buddhists think that, but that's not something that I've really found amongst Norse and Celtic lore. It's more so of learn to bear your burdens with some fortitude.
Right. Yeah. No disagreements there. Um, yeah.
And I think that also gives us a unique opportunity to kind of sink in our roots into the soil where we live, whether it's here or if someone was living, across the pond in either direction. It's the idea that within paganism, where you are, that is home. You are supposed to make your home. You are supposed to be manifesting that home here. It isn't about you worrying about where you'll escape off to in the afterlife or how things might work out in your incarnation. There does seem to be a bit of an emphasis of keep your focus here and now while planning for the long-term future of your family.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely say so. I would say in pagan society, that's why children were valued, or at least in most pagan societies. Some not necessarily so, but your children are your legacy. I mean, you live on through them. Your ancestors lived through you, and now through them, that passes on. And in some ways, that is that eternal life after death is your children and your grandchildren and every generation that comes in afterwards, and how that grows and how that changes.
It's a nice breath of fresh air, isn't it? After so many people, they're so focused on, the next 5 minutes, the next tweet, the next election cycle. How quickly can I throw up an ugly building and charge ridiculous rent for it? It's always very short term. There's so many people who are not thinking, and that's what frustrates me when we get bad press, because I'm like, we have so many ideas that would be benefiting to you, and you wouldn't have to convert. We just have good ideas we would like to share.
Right. Yeah. We're not going door to door asking if you found Odin. We're just living our lives trying to contribute to our society the best that we can.
Yeah, and also when it comes to pagan gods, I mean, finding Odin, good luck. He has a wandering foot. I mean, there's no telling where he might be or where his attention is at any given moment. He's much more likely to find you. And even then, it's not like he's going to take up residence in your life necessarily. It is a very different dynamic between us and our gods. In some ways, I think it's closer than what you might see in non-pagan religions. In other ways, it's like there's that tie can exist and the bonds can exist without being constantly in each other's pockets. Is that something that you found as well, or is that idea just special to me?
No, I would definitely agree with that. Although I say tying the bonds of paganism where I live is a little bit harder because most of the pagans around here is about as far left as you can go.
Oh, I was referring to the bond between a pagan and their deities.
Oh yes, yes. I have found that, because I have found that, at least for me, in who I honor, and really have special connection to my family, to my ancestry. I can see it. Some personal experiences that I've had in dealing with that.
And I would say that that process, going through that, tends to make a person more whole, or at least they're more integrated. There's not as many pieces of themselves flying off to the winds.
Right. It is an excellent grounding, I would say, in having that connection with the divine, and it's nice to be able to have that without having to pass the money around, or having to worry about sending so much money, or my soul's condemned to hell, or whatever else. It is, people talk about a personal relationship with Jesus. My relationships with my deity are about as personal as they can get.
Oh boy, isn't that the
not
truth?
with any promises of grandeur and fortune and anything else. It's maybe able to help you, maybe not, but if not, still with you, by your side, no matter what happens.
And sometimes they give you chores, or at least mine do.
Yes, depending on who it is. Some are I don't want to say taskmasters, but they do have lots of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, and it also, I think it's very reflective about what our society currently needs, because certain deities, they'll be saying, I have something that can contribute to this situation. Because, for whatever reason, even though I'm sure if they wanted to, they could just forget all about us, they do appear to be pretty involved. I mean, at least that's the perception that I'm seeing. And also very much amongst Americans, sometimes to the irritation of our European cousins.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't disagree with that.
So I think we do have an opportunity to be kind of pioneers for laying the groundwork for what more so of what paganism might look like with a an American cultural impetus, uniting those things. Because other pagans around the world, they kind of have that built in. That kind of work, it was done so back far into the mist of times. I mean, no one understands what the process was like. No one understood what the controversies were, how people went about kind of sorting out their own philosophical discussions and what disagreements were and how those were resolved or anything else. They just have simply have inherited the memory of what was, and they're building on top of it. And my contention has been of, well, we're in America. We're on different soil than you. We're experiencing different things, and we have people from every tribe of people and from the world centered here. So I don't see how we could possibly be a carbon copy of anything from elsewhere in the world. And so that's really been my justification for the project that I've been doing. You've been pretty enthusiastic about this project as well. What's your own take on what justifies us in pursuing this?
I think what justifies us is honestly a sense of unity, not necessarily like a new religion, but it's like a foundation to where American pagans can focus on and find unity, and maybe in some sense a bit of comfort knowing that there is something out there that we can look at and say, these are our values, these are our traditions, and then when we come together, we already have that bond between those virtues and those values. Because you're right. I mean, a lot of people are very, they have their gods and they have their relationships with their gods. And I personally don't think it would hurt to have some sort of representative gods that represent the values and virtues in America. And that's up to be debated on what it is, including people's own personal pantheons. Kind of like, I don't know, kind of like how Rome was. Rome had their state gods, and then, of course, everyone had their own patron gods at home that were of value to them as well. And it would not hurt to have an American pantheon where these gods, if they're willing, set the virtue for American pagans and how it pertains to be an American.
For
Does
sure.
that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think you said more eloquently what I was trying to say with my last week's live stream about here's some gods who might be relevant to us, and throw stones, I guess, but could we talk about it while you're throwing the stones? Because it is controversial, and I definitely get that for people, and it's, and I don't think that you or me are really trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to figure out what the hell the wheel looks like for us as American pagans. And
right. No, I agree.
And I just want to thank Marcus. He's always a strong cheerleader in the chat room, and it's always encouraging. He's saying you're making excellent points. I love it. Thank you, sir. You are such a boost to confidence. And and then he went on to say, when it comes to an American pantheon, I say, why not? Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to start the conversation. I did that last week. So shots were fired across the bow, and I'm waiting to see who returns fire and what they have to say for themselves, because I think it is very important for us to talk about, what gods just kind of naturally flow with us, because those will probably be the ones that we connect with kind of in a broad cultural sense. See, and is anything okay? Rumble's quiet. Think we're caught up on the YouTube comments already. So what's something else important that's important to you that you would like to bring to the kind of this conversation as we kind of sift through these murky waters? What do you think about?
Well, like I said originally, that unity factor, that ability to bring especially conservative pagans together, especially since I would say the Marxist version of paganism seems to be very unified, trying to find that unification within the conservative pagan movement, and with that unity, building that trust and building that confidence within each other and that reliability with each other. In a sense, kind of like you said, not reinventing the wheel, but maybe in a sense, making our own special clan where we're more akin to each other than we are just friends or associates. It's more than just
Mm-hmm.
a political or religious movement. This is more of a movement of a family based on
Yeah.
the values and the virtues that we have within the faith that we have, even though we may not have necessarily the same pantheon or whatnot, but
Mm-hmm.
just for the fact that as crazy as the world is, we definitely need each other. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is where this movement comes in. It is bringing that unification together, despite being hundreds, thousands of miles apart.
Yeah. I mean, and it's difficult because the technology definitely has its limitations. I mean, nothing's ever going to be as good as like, oh gosh, suddenly we're all in the same village. How nice. Because if, you did find every conservative pagan and then, Scotty beamed us all up and then he beamed us down and, we all had essentially our own little town. We probably have enough differences in, in trades and skills and professions to where be like, oh, okay, give us till lunchtime. We'll get sorted out. We'll unpack and we'll just get going. And that'll just be what we do. I think it could happen pretty naturally. And as we don't have the absolute ideal situation. I'm a big proponent of, well, we'll make lemonade out of the lemons, and hopefully, as time goes down the road, we'll have better things. And I think that if we come together, just going through that process, not only will it make us a stronger and tighter community, not only does it give us a more positive impression to the rest of the world and to our fellow citizens, I think that also gives us a better leg to stand on when we are talking to the conservatives, particularly the religious ones, of saying, we actually do believe on these constitutional values the same as you. And we want to have a world and with both of us can coexist without violence, without, hassling each other, with, just respect and good manners. We want that. And I think that would also lift the voices for other groups that aren't traditionally aligned with the conservatives, such as people like Dave Rubin or, or atheists, people who, don't fit into that narrow paradigm. I think there's a real opportunity here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think this is the perfect time for this movement to happen. Convincing religious conservatives that I don't know. I think we would have to go for the moderate ones first.
Yeah, for
um,
sure. We'll have to
I
work our
mean,
way up the chain.
right. I do think one thing we got to watch out for is not to fall into their trap, so to speak, of
Hmm.
how they. I know we talked about it earlier, how they
Yeah.
define us,
Hmm.
and to prove in many ways that what they consider their values, that we uphold it even better than they do. Because
Hmm.
honestly, if you go in certain circles like Christian nationalists, or you even got the Catholic
Hmm.
version of Christian nationalists, they don't hold religious freedom as a value. Only
No, no.
Christianity alone. In fact, I recently listened to a podcast where a guy tried to define Christian nationalism, and it's like, no, not even when I was a Christian, that would be unacceptable. That's the reason why our founding fathers designed it the way it was meant to be. I mean, if you really want this to be a Christian nation, then you better step up and live up to your values and prove that you're the reason why we should come to Christianity and worship your God. Otherwise, what's the difference? Because I don't see much of a difference in how they act and how the rest of the world acts.
Do you think part of their zealotry is coming from a place of insecurity? Because Georgia and I have talked about this on podcasts before about how COVID really exposed the state of the Christian church and of individual Christians. And I'm wondering if maybe some of them are so virulent now and, their way or the highway in order to avoid addressing that own internal issue, whether they're facing it within their own churches of why didn't my pastor, why wasn't he acting like that man in Canada? I mean, that one preacher who, the police came, he screamed at them, called them
Yeah,
Nazis, all but physically threw them out. I was cheering that man on. I'm like, yes, that's a
yeah,
man. That,
he was
I
awesome.
yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's
he
what
was
you want to
awesome. And
see.
then there was another guy in California who did the same thing. A famous Protestant minister, John
Hmm.
McCarthy, did the
Yeah.
same thing, standing up to Gavin Newsom. And it was kind of funny what he said, and it's pretty good. It was like, that's fine. You can throw me in prison. It'd be a great job for a prison ministry. And after that, they kind of dropped it. And it's just like, that was a good threat. That's good. And I mean, I could definitely get behind people like that. But you're right.
Yeah.
It is an insecurity. It's like what we said earlier. It's kind of like ancient Rome. Their very foundations that they believe in are very well shaken.
Yeah.
And it's understandable, because even for me, even though paganism is a fairly new pursuit and it could be shaky and it can be scary, but somehow we got to get rid of this apocalyptic mindset that not everything is the end of the world, not everything is Ragnarok, not everything is the book of Revelation. It's not fire and brimstone. It's natural changes that we've seen throughout history of man since man first walked on this earth.
And that's part of the reason why I've often made the case of why I think, that Ragnarok events are tend to be cyclical. And I point to the lore that, okay, the worst thing that could possibly have happened. And then out of Yggdrasil came Balder and Hodor and, the surviving humans, and everything began again. And I'm thinking that's a lesson there, that even if the absolute worst cataclysmic thing happened, life will still restart and go on. And that's a very comforting thought to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. Will life on Earth one day end? Probably. They're speculating billions of years down the road. Not really worried about that, but we do know historically that civilizations fall and collapse, and people rebuild and move on, and new societies move forward. And life will move on. Life will move on.
And oftentimes the survivors, they become very appreciative of the good ideas that existed in their society before the fall. So in some ways I'm like, well, okay, maybe we do have some sort of collapse, but really this could be the best thing for us. We could see this as discipline. We could see this as a chance of, okay, all those really bad ideas the rest of you guys were throwing at our faces, we're not doing that anymore. Yeah, what we're doing right now, that was the outcome. We're going to be doing something else now, and you can cooperate and survive, or you could go off on your own and you'll see how long you last. And if that's how it goes, that's how it goes. And that often gets me to think about even our most ancient ideas. We don't really know how ancient they are, because who knows how many times we've had various cataclysms, whether it was ice ages or a big volcano or an asteroid or whatever else. I mean, there's got to be a reason why these good ideas endure and can stand up to test.
Right. I absolutely agree.
Let me see. I haven't checked Rumble in a little while. Okay, I do wish that StreamYard would get a little bit more Rumble friendly and enable us to see the comments in real time. That would be very helpful. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Right. But we're coming up on the hour mark, so I want to give it to you to what if you have any kind of final thoughts that have been percolating in your head throughout our discussion, anything that you really want to leave people with?
I would say, and sorry if I sound like a preacher when I say this, but to my fellow pagans out there, don't be afraid. Stand up for yourself, be courageous, hold to your beliefs, and know that you're not alone. You have Brigantia here. You can even contact me. I will leave my email out. You can contact me about anything. Long as we have each other, that's what matters, because there's strength in numbers, whether we're right next to each other or thousands of miles away. Just be courageous, be brave. Remember what your gods did before you. One of my personal favorites is Thunor or Thor, and he is known as the working man's god, and I am blue collar through and through, and I really appreciate how he stands up for the little guy. And I can take my own personal spiritual Mjolnir and crush through the opposition figuratively, not literally. I don't want to do that. That's kind of a no-no these days. But just be courageous, be strong, be brave, despite the consequences. And there will probably be consequences, and that is the natural consequence. But it's also what fuels good movements. It fuels others who are normally afraid to be even more brave. I mean, I hate to use this as an example. That's what worked for Christians early on, was the fact they were brave, and people embraced that. And now the roles are reversed, and they have done the opposite of how they were founded. And now it is our turn to embrace those values and show that, yes, we can do this better.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest case I can make for people to be brave and get in that practice, because let's say, worst fears realized. I know we're both trying to get people out of apocalyptic thinking, but let's game it out. Worst thing happens, the kind of world that pagans would be more likely to rebuild is probably going to be gentler in a lot of ways, more civilized. It'll be based around those values, because everything else has, as Marcus was mentioning in his comment, it has reached kind of the end of its road. And there's been a lot of prominent ideologies that for many years have seemed unassailable and unshakable. There's a reason why they're faltering now. And so nature abhors a vacuum. We know this. So if they completely fall, then we need to have some common sense, some groundedness to be able to offer to people so that things don't go off the rails, and so that we can at least have pockets of civilization going forward. See, and then we have Georgia, United We Stand. How very true that is. And hello to Raven Wolfgar stopping in while he redoes the single card shorts. Yes, that's what I forgot to do yesterday. I need to watch your video. I did spread the link around though, but I do still need to watch the video yourself. I really enjoyed the first video I watched of your reading from last week. That was quite insightful, and I've definitely been using that for my meditation. So I must thank you for that. Also, next Tuesday, Mr. Raven Wolfgar and I will be having a conversation about a recent Glenn Beck video, which was also the inspiration for our conversation. So this is going to be an ongoing theme, because I really, truly believe that the more pagans who speak and say, I'm not this, whatever it is you think I am, here's who I actually am, try to judge me accordingly if you can. I think that'll go a long way. Because I think people are desperate for anything that even remotely resembles normal. So when they see that pagans are not people who have peculiar hair, they're coming out with horns and full ritual garb all the time, they see that we could be their next door neighbors. I think that would be very comforting for them. And comforted people tend to be more open-minded people.
Right. I actually want to add one thing to Marx's comment. Is when you look at Marxism, it really is a corruption of what Christianity is, and that's why Christianity struggles. It is its dark doppelganger, as you would use in a paranormal sense, and that's I agree with him. That's why Christianity will fail, because Marxism is its evil dark twin that it can't seem to confront or deal with.
Yeah, and the horrible thing about it is that it didn't take any of the virtues of Christianity. Because, there are good parts of their scriptures. About, reaping what you sow, do unto others, basic common things that, most people, we can get together on that. We can get together on mutual respect. But Marxism, it won't take any of that on board. It's an absolutely terrifying thing. And in a way, I think we have our own version of that with the leftist pagans. Yes. I can't identify anything that's actually consistent with pagan lore or pagan principle of what they do, but boy, howdy, do they claim the label.
They do, and they unfortunately take many of the stories and corrupt those stories. One guy who I used to really respect tried to use the story of when Thor was in disguise in order to get Mjolnir back, use that as an example of transgenderism, and it's like, no, that's a guy who just dressed up to fool somebody to get his hammer back. It had nothing to do with actual cross-dressing or transgenderism. That's like reading way into a story that didn't need to be.
I think about how many gymnastics you have to do to even get to that idea. His whole goal is, I need my hammer back. Oh, Freya, go marry the dude so I can get my hammer back. And she said, excuse me, and sent him away with a flea in his ear. And so out of sheer desperation and to Loki's entertainment, Thor had to dress up. It just amazes me that they'll take the example of Thor, who was clearly uncomfortable and furious, absolutely livid that he had to go that far just to get his danged hammer back. And they'll say, oh yeah, that's totally transgenderism and this and that. I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. He was making a sacrifice to accomplish a goal. Simplest explanation, gang. Why are you making it hard?
Exactly.
Well, we are up on an hour now. Would you like to remind people where they can find your podcast?
Yes, if you would like to escape a little bit of the world, you can check in the American Folklore and Paranormal podcast. Try to do it weekly, although we are coming up to the end of the season, talking
Mhm.
about urban legends, ghost stories, folk heroes. Um, I have two more. I'll give you a clue. The next one will be on Mothman. I won't tell you what the last one, and there will be a bonus one for 4th of July. And then when we creep closer to the spooky season, hopefully that will be an excellent season. I'm hoping to portray some really good, scary stories, and I want to take some time and try to make it a better production than it has been. So, and that's the American Folklore Paranormal Podcast.
Awesome. I am so looking forward to October. I am hoping for some spine tingling scares. I think that'll be great fun. And yeah, I think that does it for us. Thank you, everyone who's been hanging out in the comments. Appreciate all the interaction. It makes for a much better show. And thank you, sir, for coming on. And I hope this won't be the only occasion you pop on with me. And anytime you have a topic you'd like to discuss, let's get you and let's see if anyone else is available and start having these things more round table because the more pagans we have talking about this who are sane adults, the better impression we make for the rest of our community, both our religious community and our fellow Americans.
I agree, and I would love to do it again.
Awesome. All right. Bye, everyone.